Year 1995, Russia, Rostov region. Police find women's bodies in countryside one after another, and sometimes witnesses saw a short man with crazy eyes leaving the crime scene. And all of this happens in the same area where infamous Andrey Chikatilo was killing dozens of women in the 80s and 90s. Could it be a copycat? In this video, I will tell you full story of one of the most insane serial killers in Russian history, Vladimir Muhankin. Everything started February 21st, 1995, when the body of 50-year-old Lydia Ivanishka was found in the suburb of town Shakhty. Lydia worked as a security guard on the construction site, and she was brutally murdered by 20 stab wounds in lower part of her stomach, with something very sharp and long, because weapon reached victim's heart. This wasn't something extraordinary in this part of Russia in the 90s. Rostov region, where city Shakhty is located, was among the highest in terms of crime and murder rates during that era. High unemployment and large number of criminal gangs there made it much worse. So after finding Lydia's body, detectives at first concluded that most likely this murder was committed by someone she knew, probably because of jealousy. But the head of one of the investigation departments, Anatoly, had other thoughts. Anatoly was sure that the murder was committed by a serial killer and a sexual predator, and the attacks will repeat soon. His colleagues were very skeptical about it. He was viewed by them as someone who is almost obsessed with serial killers. Anatoly even created his own database of 30,000 people who committed violent crimes so he could find similarities and catch a serial killer in future. And he was even writing his own book about serial killers of Russia. Anatoly was convincing his colleagues that it is not just a single murder of passion because of the weapon type and the fact that the murderer, after killing the victim, was mutilating the body in horrific ways. Body was not assaulted by the murderer, but the victim was naked, and Anatoly was sure that the motive was sexual. And shortly after it, everything he said was proven by another victim. 1 week later, another body was found not far from the bus station with wounds that were similar to the first victim. And again, murderer after killing continued to mutilate the body. But still, some of his colleagues were skeptical that these two murders were committed by one person. Soon, Anatoly was joined by another investigator, Mohanken. They were working together on the case of Andrey Chikatilo and became close friends while catching the most infamous serial killer in Russian and Soviet history. They were still meeting from time to time and discussing cases they have been working on, helping each other and sharing opinions. Yendiev, after hearing the details, agreed with Anatoly's conclusions. They both knew that the serial killer started the murder spree, and if they won't be stopped, many more people will be killed. Amurkhan was working on his own case and promised to join Anatoly when he will solve it. Somebody was attacking lone women while they were walking in deserted areas in Rostov region and was hitting them with a steel bar on the back of their head. Then this perpetrator was taking everything his victims had with them and disappeared from the crime scenes. Because Amurkhan thought that this is only a matter of time before this unknown attacker will not only injure but will start killing the victims, he needed to close his case first. In the meantime, exactly 1 week later, murderer killed again. A woman was killed with more than 20 stab wounds in the same area of the body. Victim was also mutilated in a similar way. Each attack happened in new location. 3 murders happened in Shakhty, Saysk, and Semlyansk, which are located not so far from each other, but it meant that the attacker is very careful, and he switches the areas of the murders so there will be less chances that he will get caught. The area was swarmed with police, canine units, and discreet ambushes to catch the predator when he will attack again. Female detectives were sent undercover to walk in deserted areas as bait, but still no results. In the meantime, detectives, after examining victims' bodies, discovered that the murder weapon was more than a half meter long, which is almost 20 inches. It would be very hard to walk around with the weapon that big, and it was possible that the murderer used a car to move around. So suspicious car owners were stopped and searched too. But it still gave nothing. the killer was nowhere to be seen or caught. Shortly after it, another victim was found on the local cemetery. This time on the crime scene, more evidence were left by the killer. Detectives found a bottle, packaging from melted cheese, and a note with a poem, apparently written by the murderer. It said, "My home is a cemetery. Dead people in coffins are my friends. My comrades are darkness and night, and none of us is the enemy to you who is living." And also right there on the cemetery, detectives found a small den built from leaves and branches, where the killer apparently hid and waited for the victim. At this point, it became pretty obvious that the wounds were most likely inflicted by a shorter man. Because of it, detectives named serial killer the Dwarf. Also, all of the cemetery workers were questioned, but no valuable information was gotten out of this. Because of the place of the murder, detectives also questioned local Satanists, as this movement was pretty popular in Russia in the 90s. But still, no clues that could help them catch the Dwarf. In the meantime, Amurkhan, who was already helping Anatoly working on the murders, was investigating robberies committed by the man with a steel bar. At this point, he injured and robbed 22 women already, and as the Dwarf did, he was switching the towns where he was finding victims. And soon the unknown robbers started stabbing them instead of hitting on the head. But luckily, a 13-year-old girl and a woman he stabbed survived. They were able to describe the robber. Suspiciously, it was a balding, short, middle-aged man with long hands. While all of this was happening, the Dwarf killed again. A body of a 12-year-old girl who was missing for 3 days was found. It was almost fully burnt, so few remaining pieces of clothing helped to identify her. All of the local law enforcement forces were designated to catching the murderer. Now Amurkhan Yendiev was appointed to be lead investigator on the Dwarf's case. In the meantime, another body was found in city Shakhty. In broad daylight, the Dwarf entered the grocery store and stabbed the employee with the same giant knife he used before that. And even after the victim passed away, he continued stabbing the body. When leaving the crime scene, he took some change and 10 bottles of vodka and wine. Victim's body again was not assaulted. When officers used a canine unit to search the area, dogs led the investigators to another local cemetery, and again they found a den that was used by a killer to hide. Near this den, detectives found a piece of clothing covered with blood, and a notebook with some weird records inside that were named childhood, school, prison, cops, and court, and under every chapter a list of names and nicknames, and another piece of paper with a poem written by the murderer but no sign of Dwarf himself. While all of this was happening, Amurkhan Yendiev was still working on 20 cases of robbery, and at some point he decided to talk again with the last victim of the robber. She was just released from the hospital and something unexpected happened. She told Amurkhan that the robber had a giant long knife with him, so it was a balding short man with a giant knife. It meant only one thing, that mysterious robber on whose case Amurkhan was working and the Dwarf killer were the same person. It meant that the murderer was very active and the amount of assaults on women he committed was more than 2 dozens at this point. Then Amurkhan asked to get him weather forecasts for the past 2 months. While he was studying serial killers and other criminals, he came to the conclusion that because Rostov region often has rapidly changing weather, it significantly affects people's health, and it affects also mentally unstable people even more because of atmosphere pressure change and other factors. Andrey Chikatilo most of his crimes committed before or during heavy rains, and results have proven his points. The Dwarf serial killer assaulted his victims mostly on rainy days too. Detectives now knew that they need to pay extra attention to weather forecasts. On the April 30th, detectives got the forecast on the next day. It should have been rainy with thunder. It meant that the killer probably will strike again, but the problem was no one knew where. On the May 1st, police and even military squads were sent to all of the parks, forests, deserted areas in Shakhty and neighboring towns. Female officers dressed in civilian clothes were sent too, as bait. It was May Day celebration in Russia, so people were gathering everywhere on the streets, marching and celebrating. It made police work much more complicated. And, as it was expected, the killer went for a hunt this day. At 10 a.m., police got emergency call. In city Salsk, an unknown man attacked 20-year-old Yelena Stefan near the train tracks, and a witness saw as a short man was dragging her to the nearby forest. At 1 p.m., another call. Valentina Falco and her 15-year-old daughter Galina were attacked while walking back from the cemetery. Valentina fought the attacker viciously and sacrificed her life so her daughter could run away, despite the fact that she was seriously wounded. And while she was taken to a hospital, multiple squads were sent to the crime scene to find the dwarf. 2 hours after it, police officers finally arrested balding short man not far from nearby forest. This man's name was Vladimir Muhankin, born 1960. This man confessed to killing Valentina Falco right away, because police had 2 witnesses who saw him on the crime scene, including Valentina's daughter Galina. But Vladimir said that he had nothing to do with other murders and robberies that were supposedly committed by the dwarf. But luckily, he was very eager to talk about himself, so detectives were trying to actually understand who was Vladimir Muhankin. And was it possible that he was the dwarf serial killer himself? Vladimir's father left his mother before he was even born. When he was a kid, Vladimir was often bullied by other kids, and because of it he was venting his anger by stabbing or dismembering animals like cats or chickens. But his mother was the worst bully in Vladimir's life. She was beating him up, putting him in the corner on his knees while leaving salt or coal under them as a punishment. It was a popular way to punish kids in Russia hundreds of years ago, because as the time passes, salt gets deeper and deeper under your skin, making the pain unbearable. Because he was so afraid of his mother, Vladimir often ran away, hiding in the forests or on the local cemetery. He also constantly had violent conflicts at school, to the point of physically fighting other kids and teachers. While Vladimir was describing his life, he saw himself as a constant victim for everyone, and it never was his fault. Because all of it, Vladimir was sent to specialized school. This was a closed facility for troubled kids. It happened after he stole neighbor's chicken and fried it on the memorial to fighters fallen in the Second World War. Around 80% of kids who were sent to this school eventually ended up in prison. At the age of 18, Mohanken became a suspect in the case involving sexual crime against underage person, but he was cleared of all charges. Soon he got married, and he and his wife had a son together. But this peaceful life wasn't really going to last for Mohanken. He robbed 2 women, and while doing so, he stabbed them multiple times in their hips. When Vladimir was jailed because of it, he was constantly mocked and even sexually abused by other inmates because of what he did. This made him want to rise above others and make everyone respect him. After the release, for some time, he wanted to become a priest, but this career path was interrupted by another prison sentence, again for robbery. At the time of the arrest, of his 34 years, Mohankin has spent 18 in prison. But detectives now needed to prove that Mohankin not just killed his last victim, Valentina Falco, as he was stating, but that he was the dwarf killer and killed all of the other supposed victims. They also wanted to know what happened to Yelena Stefan, who was seen dragged by Mohankin in the woods on May 1st. On interrogations, Mohankin acted very sly. He said that he only killed Valentina by accident in a heat of passion. He was trying to convince the detectives that he's just an ordinary scammer who is using sleight of hand to trick store owners for cash. Amir Khan asked him to show his tricks, but it was obvious that Mohankin is not an experienced scammer and he's just trying to deceive the investigation. Then Detective Yandiev wanted to dig deeper in Vladimir's past to understand the reason for his crimes, and the fact that he never assaulted his victims, because what he did to them was obviously sexually driven. Amir Khan visited specialized school where Mohankin was sent when he was a kid, and one of the educators there secretly told him that Vladimir was sexually abused by 2 female students who were working as trainees there. They were bullying him, torturing and sexually abusing Vladimir. This made him hate all women, and his mother he hated the most. And while he was killing his victims, Muhankin was imagining that he was killing his mother for all that she did to him. Vladimir was also so afraid to be among other inmates that he immediately asked to be sent to a single cell, and he asked Anatoly Yevseev to stay with him every night. Anatoly agreed. Investigators needed to make him talk, so they were very gentle with Mohanken and gave him everything he asked for. Because of the good treatment and after long conversations, Mohanken decided to start talking. When he was compared to Chikatilo, he felt flattered, but he said that Chikatilo was, quote-unquote, a chicken compared to him. Soon, Mohankin confessed to killing Yelena Stefan, who disappeared May 1st in Salsk. He showed the detectives where he hid the body. And then, one after another, he was telling about the murders and robberies he committed. Between killing and robbing people, Mohankin was drinking heavily. He even created his own special drink, which he was describing very proudly. He was boiling homemade wine and tranquilizers together. Mohankin was often drinking it before and after he went to kill or rob, so his memories were sometimes blurry, and he often was waking up on the cemeteries, not remembering much. Vladimir also always compared himself to Andrey Chikatilo to the point of constantly visiting his home where he killed his first victim. He also told the detectives about the first murders he committed. Not far from Chikatilo's home, Muhankin was temporarily living in a house which belonged to Yelena Levchenko. He was drinking there with Galina Miroshnikova, who was Yelena's friend, and at some point he just stabbed her multiple times. And after it, he did the same with Galina's 7-year-old daughter. Muhankin hid the bodies not so far away by burying them near the hills. He later said that he was attracted to this place and was returning to it for a while. Soon, Muhankin killed Yelena's husband Sergei Ustinov after an argument while he was drinking with them. Mohanken had beaten Sergei to death while Yelena was cheering him up. In the morning, Mohankin and Yelena made love while Sergei's body was still outside in the garden. They later buried his body not so far away from the first two victims. When Mohankin started realizing that he'll be most likely sentenced to execution, he started pretending to be crazy. When he was telling about his murders, he was adding that he saw demons and some other creatures then, and he thought that he needed to defend himself. But detectives Yendiev and Yevseev were very experienced and they knew what he's trying to do. They asked him to give them all of his poems that he wrote, in addition to those found on the crime scenes. Mohankin was very flattered by this request because he thought that his poems are very beautiful and sophisticated. And because of how his poems were written, they became key evidence that have proven to psychiatrists that he's not insane and he was fitting for trial. When he understood what happened, Mohankin was desperately telling that he didn't write any poems, but handwriting expertise have proven otherwise. When he understood that he will be not considered insane, Mohankin retracted all of his testimony, but at this point prosecution had too much evidence against him. For 8 murders and 4 attempted murders, Vladimir Muhankin was sentenced to execution by shooting, but this sentence was replaced with life sentence in 1997 when Russia implemented moratorium on executions. We don't really know much about what happened to the dwarf after he was jailed. In 2006, Vladimir Muhankin sent a letter to the newspaper in which he said that he was very comfortable in prison. But in 2009, he gave a short interview in which he complained about the difficult conditions of serving a sentence and said that he would prefer death penalty now. He is serving his sentence in that same prison to this day. For catching Chikatilo, Muhankin, and other serial killers, Anatoly Yevseev and Amurkhan Yendiev became legends of Russian crime investigators, and their experience and methods are to this day used to teach detectives all over Russia. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me in the comments what do you think about this case, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.